Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 9 from Judges 16, God intervening for his people, the last of the Judges' stories, even though there's 5 other chapters of material to go through. But this is the last of the Judges before we finally make it to Samuel. Samuel is actually technically the last judge of Israel. So, titling this lesson, An Unlikely Messiah in Samson. So, a lot of things going on this particular slide, and what I want to do is try to compare some things here between what's going on with Samson and Jesus. I typically don't do this and make a straight bridge from this Old Testament story directly into Jesus, largely because I want us to appreciate the context for what it is without always making a direct beeline straight to Jesus. And as is the case with the Deuteronomy 18 passage I've used in other lessons that I've walked us through, and not just going from the words of Moses, a prophet like me will be raised up by Yahweh, and going straight to Jesus as if to say these words only pertain to him. But there is an escalation that leads to him as the climactic fulfillment and the ultimate fulfillment of that, right? But there are too many points here to point out that are, inescapable, I think, that are important for us to appreciate why Samson was even chosen as a judge in the first place, and in a very unique way, because all the other judges are just raised up by the Lord, because he has either divinely appeared to them or someone else, happens to rope them in, to what's going on with respect to Deborah and Barak. But here we actually have the Lord doing something extraordinary by the angel of the Lord appearing to the birth parents of this judge and then telling him that he will be raised as a Nazarite before the Lord. That takes me to the left side of the screen. So what I want to do here is try to, in a quick fashion, point out why the Nazarite vow is so significant. So under the prescription of the Nazarite vow in Numbers chapter 6, what I'm doing here is going to different places in the books of Exodus and Leviticus and pointing out how this compares to the priestly restrictions, all right? So that with the Nazarite vow, the Nazarite is to consecrate himself to the Lord, which is exactly what is told in Exodus 29 is to happen with the priests. They are to be consecrated for their specific job to the Lord. Back to the Nazarite vow, he is to abstain from wine and beer. Well, this is exactly what is told to Aaron and his sons. They are not to drink wine or beer. Now, granted, this is while they're on duty in the tabernacle, or the temple, but then again, this is a restriction that will dominate more of their lives than not. Back to the Nazarite, you must not cut their hair through the entire time of the vow. Now, there is a hair restriction placed upon the priests. They are not to let their hair hang loose. There's really not a restriction as to whether or not they can grow it long or must keep it short. If it was kept perpetually short all the time, it would seem a little bit silly to say they can't wear their hair loose. It has to be tucked up under the turban. So how long was acceptable? Not really sure. Either way, the point of commonality here is that there is a hair restriction placed upon both of them. Back to the Nazarite vow, they must not go near a dead body. This is exactly what is said to the high priest. He is not to make himself unclean for a dead person, but even more stringency is placed on the Nazarite. The high priest can do this for an immediate family member, right? But the Nazarite cannot even do that for either his father or his mother. Again, the high priest can do this for a parent, a child, or a brother. Then what happens when the time comes that the Nazarite has ended their vow? They must, in a sense, redeem themselves. They must bring an unblemished year-old male lamb as a burnt offering and one unblemished year-old female lamb as a sin offering, unblemished ram as a fellowship offering, along with all of their specified grain offerings and drink offerings, plus a basket of unleavened cakes from fine oil mixed with flour and unleavened wafers coated with oil. What's so interesting about this is you go back to Leviticus 21, and this is what we are being told happens with Aaron, the bull of the sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread, the ram for the burnt offering, the second ram, which is the ram of ordination, and 1 cake of unleavened bread, and a cake of bread made with oil and 1 wafer. So all of these things are strong points of connection that essentially show that the Nazarite vow is the closest that an ordinary Israelite can get to becoming a priest. And they don't get to go into the sanctum of the tabernacle or any sacred space because they don't have the proper lineage as being part of the clan of Levi, tribe of Levi or clan of Aaron. But what it does seem to suggest is that it's very priestly in nature, and that because Samson is under this vow, Samson is judging the people as a priest of sorts. Now, again, He's not from the tribe of Levi. So clearly he cannot be installed properly as a priest. It's just to say the functionality of what the Nazarite does is considered priestly because they are drawing themselves into a holy relationship with Yahweh that's different than the ordinary holiness that they have with respect to them being Israelite versus Gentile, right? So that's important because when you consider the idea of Samson being compared to Jesus, clearly Jesus has priestly connections and connotations with respect to his ministry as well. Now, what I want to do here is walk us kind of point for point between this encounter that Samson has with Delilah. And the point I want to make here with this is that Samson is exposing himself to Delilah by becoming much more vulnerable with her emotionally. He has kept the secret of his strength from everyone, never shared it before, and it's not inherently wrong that Samson does that. One might think that it was sinful of him to share the secret, but the Nazarite can't or is not restricted by the parameters of number 6 from telling anyone. The reason why they haven't cut their hair is because they're under a Nazarite vow. And granted, Israelites might know that, but they're not forbidden to share that information with Gentiles. Now, what she does with that information, on the other hand, becomes the sinful act of Delilah. But because the Nazarite vow is broken, then the strength tied to Samson is sapped from him, of course. So here we have Philistine leaders coming to try to persuade Delilah to tell him what the secret of the strength is, or his strength is. Kind of the same thing going on with Judas, one that Jesus has made himself emotionally available to and vulnerable with, as he's one of his closest disciples, and has walked with him now for quite some time, many, many months, maybe more than a year and a half or so. Jesus clearly knows that Judas is going to betray him, but it doesn't mean that Jesus did not love Judas. But nonetheless, Judas is the one who, under the cover of darkness, the same with Samson, is going to be the one to betray him. So notice here, the barter is for silver because the Philistines pony up silver, and the same as what is offered over to Judas. This is what Samson ends up telling her 3 different times, and then on the 4th time, she finally does the deed, but 3 different ways. He says, if you do this, if you tie me up with fresh bowstrings, or weave my hair into the weaver in 7 different strands, it will sap my strength from me. Granted, he's lying, but point being is that on 3 different occasions, and 3 different times that, on 3 different occasions, he tells Delilah, do this, and I will lose my strength. On 3 different occasions, Jesus points out to his disciples that he's going to have to go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, scribes, be killed, but be raised the 3rd day. And then, of course, on the day he finally did tell Delilah that if you cut my hair, this is what's going to happen. And then he falls asleep in her lap. And it's right around the time that Jesus is betrayed by Judas that he finds his closest friends who are sleeping in kind of a mild act of their own betrayal. Rather than listening to him, staying awake and praying and vigilantly keeping guard, instead they succumb to their own sleep. The Philistines seized him. The same thing happened to Jesus as he was arrested. Philistines gouged out Samson's eyes. Well, Jesus was openly humiliated. First in the privacy of the court of the Sanhedrin as they spat in his face and beat him, and then worse so when he is scourged by the Romans, and then, of course, all the vicious beating that takes place on the way up to Golgotha, and then, of course, his ultimate demise there. Samson stretches his arms out between the 2 middle pillars, and as he gives the last bit of strength he has in stretching his arms out fully, he brings the house down, literally. And, of course, the same thing I said with Jesus here. I need to replace that with a reference here to his actual crucifixion. I guess I just got caught up in copying and pasting from the block above and forgot to do that. Nonetheless, so when the Philistines were in good spirits, they mock and jeer, bring Samson here so that he may entertain us. And of course, the people are all standing by and watching Jesus as the leaders are scoffing, saying he saved others, tempting him. Let him save himself if he is indeed God's Messiah, the chosen one. And then Samson says one final thing to the Lord, please remember me. Please allow me this one final thing. Jesus calls out to the Lord, and his final thing is Lord, I'm putting my spirit into your hands, and in doing so, breathes his last. Of course, I'll need to unpack this more when we get into our 30-minute workshop, but I wanted to point at least these things out to give you some things to go and perhaps research on your own if you find this worthy of using. So thanks for listening. Tune in to the next session.